your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Kyler Cheatham. Kyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Thanks for being here. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, the people, process, technology, and strategy, sides of change. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, and all the audio podcast platforms. To be sure to check us out there. And we've got a great episode for you today. We've got three main segments. We're going to start off with the hot topics, and we're going to, in those hot topics, cover some of the trending topics in the digital transformation space, including safety in the metaverse. I'll be curious to hear if, first of all, A, is the metaverse unsafe? B, how we can be more safe in the metaverse. So I'll be curious to hear more about that. We're going to get some updates on the Great Resignation, which has been a hot topic ongoing for the last several months, if not the last couple of years. So we'll get some updates on the Great Resignation. We're going to talk about responsible artificial intelligence, courtesy of Microsoft. Be curious to hear more about that. And then finally, within the hot topic segment, we'll also talk about data lakes versus data warehouses. And this is just one of those philosophical nuances that I think a lot of us are really struggling with. So I'll be glad to finally settle the debate over, or the confusion over, what is a data lake versus a data warehouse. So that's an important resolution you're going to get today in today's show. So those are the hot topics we'll cover. Later, we'll have our first guest on the show, which is Ridwaan from our Third Stage Africa office, is going to be on the show talking about the role of the CIO and basically what the evolving role of CIOs are and how they can add to the business value of organizations as part of a transformation. So we'll kind of focus on that whole CIO, Chief Digital Officer sort of role and how it's evolving here in the 2020s. So stay tuned for that interview with Ridwaan. And then finally, later in the show, we will have Adam Cheatham, who's been on our show in the past. We're going to play a clip of him doing an interview with you, Kyler, talking about Microsoft Dynamics 365 implementation challenges. So that's certainly relevant if you're considering or are going through a digital transformation involving Microsoft D365, or if you're going through any sort of digital transformation of a different sort of enterprise technology. There's still some good lessons learned here and things to consider. And it's also relevant too, by the way, if you are evaluating potential technologies for your organization. There's just some good nuances and lessons learned and things to know and be aware of as it relates to D365 implementations. And if anything, that might stimulate some thoughts on how you plan for your project, whether or not it involves Microsoft. So stay tuned for that. We'll have Adam on the show later in the podcast. But before we get to our guests, what are some of these hot topics you have for us, Kyler?
So I want to start with safety in the metaverse, as this has been kind of an overarching conversation, kind of controversial. And it's not just the metaverse, it's safety on many technology platforms and what that looks like. But basically, I don't know if you know, but there is this international telecoms union that mostly the European Union oversees. And basically it sets international safety standards for technology and telecom, those types of things. So a lot of world leaders are pushing this agency to create some safety ratings, similar to how here in the US we have movie ratings to just look at I guess we have gaming ratings to look at what's appropriate for younger gamers or younger movie watchers, content consumers, that type of thing. Because they've seen within the metaverse, we have put a lot of money into developing that avatar-based interaction, right, which is the metaverse. Yet they see kind of some dark web issues creep in, like drug trafficking and other things like that. So, of course, I want to ask you the most difficult question to start our episode today is, How does safety and technology go hand in hand from a legislative body?
Well, that's a tough question. In fact, I'm going to evade the question temporarily and ask you a question. I can't gloss over this point. This is something you just said in passing. Are you saying that you can traffic drugs in the metaverse?
Yes, there is ways in which you could make that transaction because
Oh,
it is a transactional platform. As someone who's not familiar with the drug trafficking process myself, I couldn't exactly explain to you how that works.
right.
But that was one example, one of the less colorful examples that were, safe for work-based podcasts.
Yeah, yeah. And right before we started filming and recording this podcast, we were talking about the metaverse, and I know the metaverse is something that's come up frequently in this podcast, and yet I am still getting my arms around or trying to get my arms around what the metaverse is. In fact, we're sort of half kidding, or I was only like 10% kidding. But we were talking about how we should get Elon Musk on the show because he could probably explain the metaverse to us in a way that no one else could.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. I'm actually gonna tweet him after we're done.
Great.
So I'm gonna tweet him and say, "Hey, Elon, come on my show. Surely you're a fan. Surely you're listening to the show. So could you please join us to explain what in the world the metaverse really is?" So anyway, sorry for that diversion. I think that's just my question wasn't so much that I thought you might know about drug trafficking on the metaverse, but just the fact that you can is just fascinating. But that makes sense that they're using it as a payment platform. So back to your question. Your question has something to do with government regulation. And could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, absolutely. So, government regulation and technology. Are there ever going to be abilities to wrap your arms around a governance system for technological platforms, whether it's a metaverse or a social media platform? Elon Musk would have a lot of thoughts on this as well, I think. So, another call out to him. But where does that meet? Is that on a local level? And when you are looking at technologies, mostly as an organization, what are some government structures that you need to make sure that you kind of safeguard when you're looking at implementing a new technology or engaging with a new technology?
Oh boy, this is such a loaded question. And I'm trying to think of a response that doesn't get too political or share too much about my political beliefs, but because this is a politically agnostic show, in addition to being technology agnostic, we're of course politically agnostic. But what I would say is, you know, government historically has not necessarily understood emerging technologies or anything that's sort of ahead of the mainstream. So the thought of government coming in to regulate it now is semi-terrifying to me personally, even though I don't have anything to gain or lose by the government getting involved. But I don't know that we know enough about it to get to that point where we start thinking about how the government should regulate it. But to your point though, about like the drug trafficking and the dark web sorts of behavior that are starting to creep in, it's sort of inevitable that because of that, you're eventually going to have some sort of government involvement and regulation. We also talked a few weeks ago on this show, I believe it was on the show. If not, it was in one of my YouTube videos. I was talking about how the enterprise technology space is not regulated, and that's been around forever, but not as conducive to criminal behavior. But in some ways, you could argue that some of it is criminal behavior in the fact that so many transformations fail and that sort of thing. And to me, it almost seems like it's just a matter of time before the government somehow starts regulating enterprise technology deployments and things like that. That to me would make a lot more sense because it's a mature, established industry that has had significant problems and failures and overspending and fraudulent behavior at times in the B2B space. That would make more sense to me to have government regulation there, and it's been going on for decades now, versus the metaverse, which we're all trying to figure out what it is and how it's going to evolve. We don't really know what it's going to be, so it's hard to regulate. So I don't know. I guess that's why I'm giving you kind of two answers. I think if I were the government, which I don't think I ever will be, but if I were part of the government, I would say that I'd focus on the lower hanging fruit and the more mature technologies. But that's just me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an interesting dynamic as the government typically just as an entity is slow to adopt, right? And we are now in a technology revolution when we talk about things like Industry 4.0, or as you and Walker pointed out, Industry 5.0, and what that looks like. It's interesting to see how regulations will actually keep up with that innovation. I mean, I think the personification for me of this argument is when Mark Zuckerberg, who is the CEO of Meta, right, formerly Facebook, was testifying before U.S. Congress, and one of the senators asked, "Well, how can you read the text messages on my phone?" And Mark Zuckerberg said, "That's not at all what Facebook is. I have no idea what text messages are on your." So that kind of just showcases that need for that understanding from like a socio society view, right? From a business view, I think it's an interesting argument. We had a few cybersecurity clips and experts on. It's kind of interesting now that you do actually have to include employee hacking in your cybersecurity, like layering in that strategy. So when you look at how do you put up those guardrails, cybersecurity internal threats need to be, something that you consider as well. So, a lot of different ways you can take this conversation. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And having those right controls in place. And, I think the better job that the industry and or users and suppliers of metaverse sorts of activity, the better they do self-regulating. I mean, the better, the less likely does the government is going to have to get involved. But if you continue to see dark web type stuff, then of course the government at some point is going to step in and crack down on it. So I don't have a good answer for that. I don't think I ever really answered your question, which is essentially I don't know. I don't know what the right government framework.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people think that obviously they want new technology to be safe and secure, but as my son says, the bad guys will always come in there at some point, and it's just a thought of what is that impact on the overall consumer or the business. So we'll continue to, I'm sure, go down that journey. But switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about the Great Resignation, as we've seen kind of in this trend of employee-driven workforce, right? People leaving their jobs with the COVID-19 pandemic and not going back to work. A lot of that in a new study, as we do see people, this kind of slowing down and needing to go back to jobs. I looked at a study that actually it was by Women Unlimited, and it was a jobless survey of about 20,000 job seekers globally. And it said nearly a third, so 30% of people quit their previous job because of bad management. And instead of pushing employees to quit their job, it actually gives them a toolkit to be able to have that conversation with their manager to say that, how do we work together? And to flip the perspective about that manager might not have ever had anyone teach them how to manage employees or how to manage change through any sort of transformation, whether it's new policies and procedures, new technology, whatnot, and really coaching up to say, how do you understand that your manager might not intentionally be creating a bad experience, but being able to address that. And I wanted to get your feedback on that as a change management expert and kind of dig into, if you do have a bad manager, a senior manager, a middle manager, how would you recommend to an employee that likes the organization, that is a culture match, to address working in more of a toxic subculture of the organization?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is recognize that you are part of just a subculture, and that the broader, bigger picture is presumably not as bad, or it's more aligned with what you're looking for. So that's the good news, or the silver lining in the whole thing. So the question then becomes a little bit, more of a shorter term solution of how to navigate around the subculture you might be stuck in. So I think the first thing, there's a couple of options. I don't know what the priority would be. I suppose it depends on the situation and the personality of the person involved. But, your options are essentially you could, try to work your way into other parts of the organization, or into another part of the organization that isn't as toxic, or that better reflects the overall culture. That's one option. That's obviously, easier said than done, and it's going to be easier in some situations than others. But that is one option. The other is to, I think just having the conversations with management. You're starting with your immediate supervisor, which may be the source of toxicity. But having that conversation might help in terms of just maybe calling it out, not on a personal level that the person is the problem necessarily. Right. If you're not comfortable doing that, which I don't think most people would be comfortable doing that. But you could call it out as more of a, hey, this is more of a, here's what I'm looking for. Here's the type of environment I want to be in. And I feel like, in this other part of the organization, I might be a better fit. So that sort of conversation. Again, it's always easier said than done, but those are a couple ways to potentially navigate that situation.
Absolutely. And I think it's something to be said that having hard conversations in a professional environment is a skill that's important to learn, especially for transformation leaders, for project managers, for being able to kind of bring people together that are completely different experiences throughout the business, but still need to interact with the same system or align on the same strategies. Having those conversations of how do we best work together? What is your experience? Because mine isn't incredibly positive, and I'd like to come together and figure out how we can make that more collaborative. So I think there's something to be said to learning that talk track as an employee.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Another hot topic here as we switch from responsible managers to responsible AI. Recently, Microsoft had launched this concept. It was actually their Azure side that launched the concept of responsible AI. And basically what it is, and Ridwaan, I know you were in Ridwaan, we'll talk about this a little bit later, is enhancing the technology to make it as actionable as possible. So less technical, and that's their definition of responsibility, is consuming it for the organization and creating the most actionable strategies from that. So I just wanted to share an example to get your feedback on. So the largest national health services in the UK is exploring how AI will reduce wait times, support recommendations from healthcare teams, and provide patients with better information so they can have more informed decisions about their own care. So what their case study was is they took 2 orthopedic surgeons that developed an AI model to help consultants give their patients a personalized risk assessment of upcoming hip or knee operations. So basically, this is from Azure's cloud. It's the responsible dashboard and their machine learning, so they can see how the model works in real time and get a clear understanding of the most effective conclusion. So with that kind of example and that idea of responsible, I would almost call it like more like unique AI than responsible, because to me that kind of means something different. But I guess the most actionable AI, especially in healthcare and the more diagnostic process. So do you feel like that is a huge trend that we'll see specifically within the medical industry, is a more personalized care enhanced by technology?
I do, and I think it's an area that is ripe for AI adoption, primarily because, as you mentioned, it's oftentimes a matter of life and death, and certainly your health is very important to all of us. So the stakes are higher. So that's one thing that would point to potential AI. But also, I think the medical field in general, it's just so broad and so complicated, continuously evolving, that no one person can really effectively be a broad-based general practitioner that really understands all aspects of science and medicine. In fact, the industry is built around experts that specialize in certain areas, and that creates sort of a siloed industry where, if I've got just as an example, speaking of knees, I have bad knees genetically, and so I will need my knees replaced at some point. But they've been telling me since I was about 40, since right when I turned 40, they've been trying to convince me, they being the orthopedic types of doctors, have been trying to convince me to get a knee replacement because I'm going to need it someday. Just do it now. And my view has been, well, but there's other options. So I've talked to I've gone to other specialists that say, well, you can extend the life of your current knees by stretching them and exercising them and making them stronger. And so that's what I focused on. But that's just an example of how there's sort of a breakdown, a disciplinary breakdown between two different areas of specialization. And if we had AI that had actual data that could analyze and make meaning and look at my genetic background and look at, my current situation and compare it to other people and, really look at results and analyze mass amounts of data that no one person could do on their own. I think that's, super ripe for AI, and where AI is a best fit is where you have tons of data that need to be processed, and you have human blind spots or capacity issues to process that data. I think AI can be a good replacement or augmentation of that sort of specialized medicine aspect of most healthcare systems throughout the world. So, I think it's a great way to, not a great way to start, but I see that field, that industry, the healthcare industry, being a good catalyst for AI.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it has many different levels, right? We might look at something like orthopedic surgery or maybe emerging healthcare markets to where there needs to be disease prevention via data and understanding what that life cycle looks like. So I think you're right. There's just so many avenues to leverage AI within the healthcare profession. And maybe I'm just a huge nerd, but I think that healthcare in the last 2 years has been one of the most interesting industries to watch with technology, just because of not only obviously the forced transformation because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also just the ability of that change management for these doctors to embrace something like AI within their diagnostic process, which we know most of the time is very analytical and has very little room for new processes. But I think the doctors and the physicians and the healthcare professionals that embrace that ability to look at these new frontiers of technology will really have that opportunity to create greater relationships with their patients, both near and far.
Yeah, I agree. It's fascinating. I love hearing these stories, and I look forward to seeing how that technology evolves in that field and other fields too. But healthcare is particularly fascinating.
Sure, absolutely. And speaking of fascinating, you obviously have heard of the lakes versus warehouse data overall conceptual argument, but this was my actual first experience with that. So it's something I'm excited to talk to you about. So found a case study that looked at two different data companies. Basically, they took a completely different approach to data management. So the companies are called Databricks and Snowflake. And basically, Databricks is built by academics, so a former professor, and they've really focused on enhancing the overall technology of their product. And Snowflake has taken a bit of a different approach in its core strength is industry partnerships. So looking at things like Amazon sales channels, cloud data for retail industries, healthcare industries, like we're just talking about, and that overall integration. So what that kind of brings us to our lakes versus warehouse. So basically, what we've looked at is that Snowflake is more like Databricks is more like a data lake where you can, dump all of your data in, and it's run by those researchers who are really good at taking that information, putting it in the system, and creating obviously that actionable data or that overall just storage within that bigger area. Versus Snowflake, which their structure is an actual data warehouse, and that has a bit more structure in it a lot of times because that has to be integrated with other retail platforms, that type of thing. So there's this other third evolution, which I kind of just find hilarious, that we're going from lakes to warehouses. Now we're going to the lake house, and that's what I really want to talk to you about today. So basically, these data cloud lakes and warehouses, because they are critical elements in enterprise data management, they've kind of come together, if you will, to create a hybrid of the warehouse structure and the data lake storage opportunity. And then again, that's kind of how you generate those useful business insights or data. So I wanted to get obviously your feedback on this new concept of lake house, because the only lake house I ever knew was a literal house on a lake, and now we've gone, really figuratively hard in the data world. But most importantly, in all seriousness, I'm wondering your opinion on the hybrid model of that bigger storage dump and that more structured insight approach. Do you think that there is an opportunity for those to kind of meet in the middle while keeping the structured industry partnerships integration, but also having the opportunity to get your data in a secure location as quickly as possible?
Well, I'd say that first of all, I don't know who has time to think of this stuff. There's someone out there
But I
that's
really
thinking.
like it. Yeah.
Yeah, like if someone out there had to think of these terms: data
I
lake, data warehouse, data,
Lake
and
house.
now lake house. And I guess I don't. I have one of my weaknesses as a digital transformation consultant is I have trouble keeping up with, nor do I really care a whole lot about what a label is, what sort of label you put on something.
Yeah.
To me, it's just, I look at more at what does it do? What does that labeled product or service do? And how does it fit a business or not? So I guess I'd say, I think it sounds like there's an opportunity there for sure to sort of find that balance or that middle ground or whatever you want to call it. Whether or not it deserves its own category, I don't know or care. I'll leave that up to Gartner and Forrester and some of those analyst firms that create buzzwords for a living. And I love buzzwords. We've covered this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we've alluded to that. If this is your first time watching, you'll have to go back to other episodes because I repeatedly say how much I love buzzwords in a very sarcastic or facetious sort of a way. But yeah, I think I think if anything, it points to the advent of, or the evolution of, business intelligence and data processing.
Mhm.
We were talking about AI before. I think it points to a bigger picture and a bigger trend, which is data is really important, and data is becoming a currency. It's becoming an asset that organizations can
Mhm.
really find value in. And this is just a third way now that they can do so.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting that even though this is more of an emerging industry, right? Data has always been important, even, before technology integration has come heavily into the marketplace. But it's that time old argument of product focus versus customer focus, to me, is what this
Right.
kind of boils down to. Is you have two data companies that have taken a product focus approach or a customer focus approach. So I think that's the one thing that is really the argument here is which one is going to work better.
Yeah. Yeah, and in identifying what your needs are and what is you're trying to accomplish, what your current data situation is, and how you collect data, what systems you're using, all that stuff influences or should influence which of these three options make the most sense for you.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of buzzwords, if you like buzzwords, stay tuned, because talking to Ridwaan, he used to work for Gartner, just so you know, but also a great insight. My buzzword meter was just off the charts in this conversation. I was so happy. I was gleeful. My kids during breakfast time were like, "What's wrong with you?" But it was such a great conversation, not only for the buzzwords for my own entertainment, but also great insights. This honestly was one of my favorite interviews because I think it really hones in on what is a CIO or what does a technology leader mean, and how does that influence the overall impact of the organization.
Yeah, what are the skills that are underrated as a technology leader? What are some ways to develop your skills? We'll get into culture. We talk about culture and how you can create a culture of digital and technology and transformation, all that stuff. And that was part of why I brought up Gartner, because I knew he was going to be on the show, and he used to work at Gartner. So that's part of why I was sort of poking fun at Gartner and all the time he's been coming up with buzzwords. So it'll be good to have Ridwaan on the show. This is the first time he's been on this podcast. In fact, this conversation is a great one. In fact, if we hadn't just done our top 10 interviews of 2020 so far, which if you haven't listened, that's last week's episode number 71. Be sure to check that out. We have the top 10 interview clips from 2022 so far. But this interview, I suspect, might make the list if we were to do that list again. But anyway, having said that, the good news is you can listen to it now, and we're gonna have Ridwaan on the show to chat through some of these topics related to the role of CIOs and how they can add to business value and how their roles are evolving now in the 2020s. So we'll have Ridwaan Bardien on the show. He's from Third Stage Africa, out of Johannesburg, South Africa, in our office based there in Africa. So we'll have him on the show when we come back. But first, we'll take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, and you can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, and audio podcast platforms throughout the world. And we're constantly adding to our network of podcast carriers that offer this show, so be sure to check us out wherever you listen. But at the very least, I know you can find us on Spotify, Pandora, Amazon, Google Podcasts, etc. All the big guys, you can find us there for sure. So our next guest, I'm excited for, first-time guest, Ridwaan Bardien, who is Managing Director at Third Stage Africa, our office in Third Stage Africa, and he is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And he's going to be on the show here today talking about the role of CIOs and Chief Digital Officers, as well as how those roles are evolving and changing, what you need to do to succeed as a CIO or CDO, and also how those roles are adding increasing business value to organizations throughout the world. So all that being said, Ridwaan, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric.
So just to start, maybe before I dive into the questions here today, if you could just share a little bit about your background and what you've done throughout your career, sort of a summary view, as well as what you do here at Third Stage.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. So I'm a director at Third Stage Africa, and I'm based in Johannesburg, originally from Cape Town, and it's kind of like a joke here because Cape Town seems to be a nicer part of South Africa than Johannesburg. So people are always surprised that I'm here, but I'm saying I like being here because it's where all the action is. So a little bit about myself. Yeah. So like I said, from Cape Town, I actually started at the bottom of IT, worked my way all the way up from business analyst. I did project management, systems implementation, all the way up to CIO level. And then just prior to joining Third Stage Africa, I was an executive partner at Gartner. And I spent 5 years there talking to, and also just prior to that being a CIO. So I spent about 5 years talking to chief information officers. I saw the rise of the chief digital officer, this chief integration officer. So I've not watched this from afar or actually read about it in an academic sense. I actually experienced a lot of this. So I'm hoping to bring a lot of that experience and just some clarity maybe on the way forward in terms of the role. So once again, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here today, especially late in the day, your time. We appreciate you joining. I guess just to start, we want to dive into the specific roles of the CIO and what some of the emerging trends are and how they can best add value to an organization. But before we go there, maybe just to give us an overview, sort of that high-level flyover view of what is a CIO? What is a CIO's role and responsibility? How do they fit into an organization?
So the thing about the CIO role, it's kind of a bit difficult to talk about it generically. So let me talk about where it started and where it is now and the different forms and shapes that it has. So I think it started around about in the 1980s where, and traditionally they started reporting to the CFO because that's where the big the systems were, the ERP system, financial systems of record. So they kind of started out in that space. And then over the years, we've seen the role morph and change to become more of a business executive, like to become to be actually be a member of Exco, to the point where you're actually going and asking for funding and things at board level. So becoming like a true executive in the organization. I think it would be a bit of a disservice to put all CIOs in that label, because if you look at some of the, especially in Africa, if we look in the SME market, and that some of them are still reporting to the CFO, and they might have a role of head of IT. So the traditional role was looking at the back office processes, systems of record, making sure that everything works. But I think the role has morphed now. So, and I've seen this before the pandemic, and the pandemic actually just accelerated it. It is more about revenue now. It's about driving costs. It's about bringing operational efficiency. And so digital transformation has moved from just digital optimization. In other words, keeping the lights on, making sure things are efficient, lowering your risks of doing business, to creating new business models and giving input into that, and then looking at new revenue streams. And I think that's an uncomfortable shift. I see that, in third stage Africa, working with CIOs and my time at Gartner, it is not a natural shift for a lot of the CIOs. Because if you take someone like myself, my background was actually almost in like an engineering, like a technical person. I was fortunate in that I was mentored by chartered accountants. So that was quite weird. And I ended up doing a national diploma in cost accounting. So I always had that affinity for business. So for me, it was a little bit easier to make the transition. And all of those things came into play, like when you go into the boardroom, like talking about budgets and business and things like. And I'll give you an example. Like when I was at South African National Blood Services one time, I thought, let me do something altruistic in my career. So it's very complex, though. It's not as, it's a different model from the American model, where you have one part of the business that collects the blood. Then it gets given to another organization that maybe, see if the blood is clean, and things like that. At South African National Blood Services, it was from the beginning to the end, so it's very, very complex. And I remember sitting with Microsoft one day as a CIO, and this was about 5, 6 years ago, and I said to them, "What do you think my job is?" And Microsoft said to me, "It's to make sure that the systems are running, there's uptime, and then." And my answer to them was, and they all just went quiet. I said, "My job is to save lives." And that's how I looked at my IT department, and that's how it was interesting then. And then they started giving me more parts of the business, and then I was actually groomed to become the CEO. So that's what I've seen, and I do a lot of coaching and mentoring with CEO. So I think it's important that you need to understand your role is no longer about that IT. And something I did that shook up my department one day is I just joined. I was there about a month. I stood in, it was about 100, 200 people, and I said, this organization can outsource from me to all of you.
Mm.
It's like, what? And I needed to get the attention. I said, now we need to shift and help the business, and some instance even run ahead of the business. So I've seen the pandemic. It's now it's accelerated this, right?
Mm.
What I've seen, and here's what I've noticed is, because if you look at our backgrounds, coming through IT, we have this thing called, I used to call it urgency addiction. So when things go wrong, we're very good at it. So I said I would either be in IT, or I'd be a fireman.
Right.
People running this way, we run that way. Like, oh, we get excited when things are not working. So I think the pandemic was fantastic, right? But yes, was interesting. Like, it's fantastic in that, yes, there was this urgency addiction, and globally, I mean, I don't think there was one company that made the front news that couldn't do the transition. So hats off to the guys who are doing that. But it doesn't stop there. And that's what I've seen now. They seem like, oh, we've done this, so we're fantastic. We can now relax. Everybody's doing remote work. No,
Mm.
you need to realize that now you need to capitalize on this. So let me stop there. I think you can see I'm very passionate about this topic. But the trend is, yeah, starting in the back office, but you are now more front facing. Does it apply to all CIOs? Some guys on the call might be going, hey, but hang on, I'm still reporting to the CFO. Yes, we still have that. But if you look at the big players, the global players, think that The CIOs, if you talk to them now, they sound more like business people.
Yeah, and
That's what
it sounds like from what you're saying that shift from CFO, where perhaps the focus was on cost containment and protecting assets, it seems like it has evolved from that into more of a competitive differentiator, less of a commodity where you just have to control costs and make sure things work and that the lights stay on. But now you're shifting that focus to quote unquote saving lives in the case of your experience, or whatever the broader goals and objectives are of the organization. So it's interesting to see how that role has evolved and how the CIO role has become more integrated into the overall strategy of the organization. Do you think that's because technology is viewed differently in that context of competitive differentiator and competitive advantage versus just a necessary evil that you've got to contain cost on?
I think so. So it's coming from board level, right? So here's my experience. So I've seen this over the years. So boards started putting pressure on their CIOs to play this role. What I saw happened in Africa particularly is then they brought the CDO on, Chief Digital Officer. The Chief Digital Officers that they brought on were more from a marketing sort of background. So they were putting the focus there, like digital channels, things like that. When I looked at that, and I wasn't working for Gartner at the time, and I challenged them and I said, they said this role is going to evolve, and I said it's not going to. And the reason I said it was from my perspective. Remember, I'm a CIO with an army behind me. You bringing a CDO, it never happened to me, but this is what I saw. You bringing a CDO who doesn't have that, and you're now expecting them to perform. They need to do all of these things, right? But I said it's not going to work. And in Africa, we've seen that. Not now, but back, say, 5-6 years ago. Then that CDOs, they got kicked out, right? So the CIO was like, okay, in that space. But what's accelerated it now and brought the CDO role back, and I mean, we see that a lot now, is that it's easier. Those things are commoditized now. The cloud, I mean, using AI, so you can bring a CDO on board and you can say to them, and I've worked with a very large financial institution that's actually done that. They said to the CIOs of all the different divisions, not that you, let's put it delicately, you're old school. This is not going to work. And then this CDO that they brought on board didn't need them. So my story is no longer valid. You don't need that CIO, the general with the arm. You can now spin up a cloud service if you need to. You can get all of these things that you need. It's less about the tech and what you can do with the tech. So we've seen that. The other interesting thing that I've seen also is that CIOs are coming from business backgrounds. I've seen one where the guy was a lawyer before, is a CIO now. So interesting that thing. But I think it's a natural progression. It makes sense that is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. We're here talking to Ridwaan about the role of CIOs in the 2020s. We're going to continue the conversation when we return after a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. We're here with Ridwaan out of the Third Stage South Africa office, and we're here talking about the role of CIOs in the 2020s. One question I have that I want to pull from the audience here, let me find it here, is what is the difference between a chief information officer, CIO, and a chief digital officer, CDO? So you were starting to talk about a CDO. Yeah. How would you sort of summarize those differences between those two roles?
So if you think of it in terms of let's look at IT like an operating model, like a business. So if you have both in an organization, because it depends, I don't think we should get so caught up in the names, but I'll explain the difference quickly. Let's say you have a CIO and a CDO in an organization, then that question is very relevant, right? So if you look at IT as a purely like a business, then the CIO is almost like the COO, if that makes sense. So they look after the back office. They make sure things is the innovation that comes. Yes, obviously, there's new technology. It's not just about technology refresh and things like that. So there is innovation, but it's on the existing business. So you can still increase productivity or increase your margins, by bringing in business process re-engineering, upgrading your ERP system, doing those things. So it's more back end focused. The chief digital officer will be then almost like the CEO. So they more revenue. They chase revenue. So their reporting lines to the board, and because the board is very very interested in that role, would be about what are the what other business models are you looking at? What So I'll give you an example of this large financial. I can't unfortunately mention the name. So you have this large financial institution who has a CDO. They've got different groups and clusters who've got CIOs. So they focus on traditional business. Her job, and what I worked with her was almost like spinning up a fintech. So she's gone out and she's starting to work with all these other different smaller companies, that's more nimble IT companies. Their main focus is to change the business model and find alternative revenue streams or increase the existing ones. That's the major difference between the two. But I don't want to do the CIO a disservice, because in some organizations, the CIO is stepped up and playing the role of a CDO. They've realized, if I don't do this, I'm going to be replaced, or I'm going to get CDO is going to come. So they have started to do that. But if you have both in an organization, I hope that gives some clarity between the two.
Yeah, it sounds like, there's two things happening here, and they're sort of dovetailing. One is the evolution of the CIO role into that more strategic partnership, revenue driving role. The other one being that the chief digital officer, the advent of the CDO role has sort of pushed organizations further in that direction. I know a lot of clients we work with, you have call it old school, to use your words, and I agree with those words, by the way. You have sort of an old school CIO that's already in place, and they're really good at the break fix type stuff, making sure that you're supporting the current systems, you're improving the current systems, you're fixing stuff when it breaks, you're doing customization requests, all that stuff, just sort of maintaining and preserving the systems. But that same person oftentimes doesn't have the skill set or the capability to be able to do the more innovative strategic thinking,
Correct.
the more use of technology as a strategic enabler. Have you seen CIOs struggle with that evolution? And if so, what can they do to kind of overcome that difference?
So we have seen them do so. So a lot of them have come from like the traditional, and through no fault of their own, right? That's just the way it was. You would become a CIO because you had a strong background in IT, for example. So like I was did a senior business analyst, and then I became a CIO. But I was a senior business analyst in IT. So that was the natural progression to get there. But what I learned very, very, very quickly, and I was fortunate to work in my first job as a CIO. I had a CEO who told me this one day, and I'll never forget. When I was presenting in the room, and he called me aside. He said, "Ridwaan, you don't always have to come to these meetings and be the expert on the particular topic that you're talking about." So I was like, "What?" So that's not what we do, right? So we the experts. We must know everything as a CIO. And then I realized it's about leadership. It is actually about leadership. So we have seen. So I'll give you examples of we have seen the guys who make this transition are those who are good leaders. So they went, okay, I don't need to know. I need to know enough about it, like become like a generalist again, know enough about everything. But I need to then go and say, right, we need to move the business forward. I need to speak more like a business person. I need to do, things like. I find the guys who struggle, who come, let's say they come from a very, very, very strong technical background. It's hard for them to move away. I've seen this in even in organizations with CEOs. And I'll never forget, I was busy working with an organization, and this will maybe make sense. So they started the company, and they were database administrators, and I was working with him, contracting, working with him and his team, making the change, digital transformation. And I was in his office one day, and he was very upset about something, and I said, what's up? And he said, these guys here, when they struggle with the database and they don't know how to, they don't come and ask me for help. I was like,
Right.
no, it's not about that anymore. You just need to be the leader. Like, what's up? How can I guide? So I think the guys who are able to pivot to becoming leaders, focus more on their leaders, understand the business more, make the transition easier. I think if your natural inclination is to tinker and change, and I think you're going to struggle in this world.
Mm.
Is it possible to change? Yes, I would say maybe get an executive coach, spend more time with your C-level suite, understand, emulate. Like, I started to emulate that CEO because he was the first one to tell me something like that. So that's what I did. I hope that answers. I came in a bit of a roundabout way, but it's
Yeah.
essentially, it's about leadership. That's what you need to make that transition, and know that it's okay not to know. If I
Yeah.
can use one more example, for example, so as you can see by the gray, I'm not a youngster, so I'm not on all social media platforms, but we had, let's take the South African National Blood Service as an example. So we had an aging donor base, so we wanted to reach out to the younger. So I brought somebody on board who was 20 something, and I brought this individual to come and present at board level, and I got up, I introduced her, and said, I this is not my area. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not doing all of this. I'm on LinkedIn, yes, because I'm more of a professional. She's going to give a presentation of what these 20-year-olds are doing. So you need to know, you need to have this vulnerability, that because when you're in IT and you're coming through the rank, you're the expert in the room and you must know everything. You need
Right.
to have this vulnerability now and go, hey, I don't know everything, but I'm leading. I'm not saying you're throwing your hands up. I don't know. I'm leaving the room.
Right.
I'm guiding us to get to not to the younger donors. So I'm going to bring this youngster in. So I think if you need to, yeah. Bottom line is you need to be a leader. That's
Yeah.
what it is.
That's well put. I,
Yeah.
I I agree with that, and I think that vulnerability, and maybe even going deeper than that, and just that seeking to understand. You're trying to understand
Yeah.
the business needs. You're trying to understand the business drivers. You're trying to understand the pain points that the business has and the ways technology might be able to solve it. I think that open mindedness and that curiosity and that digging and understanding
Curiosity.
is really important.
Mm.
Did you, just out of
Yeah.
curiosity, when you were at Gartner, did you spend a fair amount of time coaching CIOs through this sort of transition, the transition of the role, and helping them just
Yes.
understand and embrace that?
Yeah. So there was two parts to the role. Obviously, as executive part, we do a whole lot of different things, but I'll focus on this, the coaching and mentoring. With the more seasoned senior CIOs, um, I was more of a sounding board.
Mm.
So I was more like, we know you've done this before. What you all thinking? So that's, and they loved it because, let's be honest, the CIO role, if you've ever done it, and I'd like to hear from the guys' comment, it's one of the most loneliest roles that you can
Mm.
have. It's the most misunderstood role, and it's one of the most, if you see of the blogs and things, it's one of the toughest roles. Where the so where I would do the coaching and mentoring, a lot of times the CIOs, because in South Africa particularly, we find at the moment the CIO, they're rotating a lot, so they'll end up with an acting CIO, for example. So I actually
Mm.
coached in with one of my clients in Africa, in Botswana, from the acting role to CIO role to the CDO role. And I've done
Mm.
this with, that's just one example, but with all of them I impress this thing upon them, right? Uh, 90% of your time needs to be on the business. Where's the business going? Look at what you can
Right.
start to outsource and think. You don't have to retrench people and think you can reskill and look at other things, but sound more like a business person. Sound more. So I've seen this with my own eyes, that people then become CDOs because they talk more about the business. Yeah. So a lot of the coaching and mentoring I did was around the soft skills. It wasn't
Mm.
about, hey, you need to become a better programmer. You need to understand
Right.
AI better. Yeah, with Gartner we do that. So when I was at Gartner, but a lot of the coaching and mentoring I did was how to become a better business person, and so a lot of it was to do with articulating the business value of IT. So
Mm.
so a lot of the coaching I did, and it's extremely important, is communication. So they would come with 100 document and they're going to the board. I'm like, no, come, wait, hang on. What are your message? What you're trying to do? Because one of the things we did at Gartner was the art of storytelling. So what is the story you're trying to tell? Okay, no. Put that in business terms. So don't talk about uptime. Talk about the fact that it was up so many, that was the sales, that you tie those things together. So change that language. And that language, from my own personal experience, I experienced that myself, is that when I started to talk more about business, they started to pay more attention to me, because I picked up before, when I started to talk, they would switch off because it's technical terms, it's technical jargon. That's where we go. So I started to use their technical terms, their technical jargon. So I coached a lot in that space, and I've seen the guys who took to it did really well. They ended up going from the acting to actually becoming the CIO. So I coached them for their CIO interviews as well. I said, speak more business. Don't sound like a techie. That's the worst
Right.
thing you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, you tend to lose credibility pretty quickly with the business people when you speak too techie in that context. Here's an interesting
Yeah.
question from Hilton over on LinkedIn. Actually, more of a comment, but I want to get your reaction to this, Ridwaan. And Hilton says, always amazed that we create new roles such as CDO, Chief Diversity Officer, and then create exactly the same infrastructure and bureaucracy and expect different results. Organizational design and culture are still not enough focus to unleash this. What are your thoughts on that? I think it's a really good point in terms of you can't just say, okay, I hear you, Ridwaan. We need to create more of a strategic view of IT. So we're going to create this CDO role. We're going to create a chief digital officer role to support our CIO. Let's just say, what's the problem with that, or what are the pitfalls, or how does that sort of limit your ability to do what you're saying just by creating that role? Are there other things you need to do to create that infrastructure and the general cultural change that needs to go along with that?
Correct. So, and it's almost like the savior complex, right? Let's create the CDO. Let's create the CDO role, and they're going to save us. And
Right. They'll
yeah.
come in
So
and figure it
I'm
out for us.
laughing big because I've seen your culture of your organization is extremely important. Because I'll give you an example. Even like when I was trying to do some stuff, the older guys in my IT department, like, what? No, we're not going to do that. So I even had clashes there, right? Now imagine if you got clashes in your own department, you still got to deal with the whole organization. So what I did was, first of all, I agree. A title, yes. I read a book years ago. There was an organization that got rid of titles. I'm like, oh yes, fantastic. Just get the job done. So I agree with that. Um, what I would also say is, yeah, don't focus too much on the title and that, because digital transformation is a team sport. It is not one person. It involves the whole of Exco. It involves that senior management layer. You need to get the people involved. So what I was all about, I like that about change management. So I was talking to one of my colleagues earlier who's an expert in change management. So I don't know all the terms, but I think I did it just naturally. So one of the things I did to break down that barrier, to not have the savior complex. Oh, we got a CDO who's gonna, is I would create what we now call fusion teams. Is I would create, say, there's this problem that we need to solve, then I would open it up to all of the business. So you had people from across the business working on this, and it was fantastic. So they weren't paid extra for doing it, they were just excited to do it. But I think it was great for their careers. If you think about it now, I did this 6 7 years ago, so some of them probably branched into IT. um, and they were working after hours, and so it was like a cross pollination. I used different people. So the thing is, and this was a discussion I was having with my colleague, is that change management, and I think I'm still answering the question, right? Because they asked about change management.
Right.
Change management is not something that sits there on the side that you put on the project plan and then you do this. Change management, if you're a leader, it is core to what you do. So irrespective of what your title is, to make that change, you have to incorporate that in. So that's what I did. I broke down barriers. I started to break down this thing like, what do? I save lives. I just give you one example. I start to break those things. I don't think we should get so hung up on these titles, because
Mhm.
it's constantly changing, and I don't think it's doing anybody any good. Sorry, that's just a personal pet peeve of mine. These different titles that get the job done,
Yeah,
but be a
absolutely.
leader. Get the job done. And I think that the traits that you have as a CEO, CDO, CIO, CFO, COO, leadership traits are transferable across all of that. There's certain things that you need to, that you have.
Right. And I think
I
you're
don't know if
getting
I've answered that. Yeah.
and I think you hit on the point earlier with change management. So many organizations and clients we talk to are going through some sort of transformation, a digital transformation primarily. And a lot of the comments we hear is that we're not just looking to put in new technology, we want to create more of a culture of technology, and that's the enablement that comes along with that. So I think organizations seem to intuitively start to recognize that it's not just a matter of putting in a CDO role or putting a new title on the CIO role and calling it a chief
No.
digital officer and assuming the transformation is going to happen. They recognize it goes deeper. It kind of gets into the fabric and the DNA of the culture of the organization.
Correct. So if I could just answer something that just came to my mind. So the biggest inhibitor of a digital transformation, the biggest inhibitor is culture. So
Yeah.
I remember years ago, my stepdaughter, she was 10 at the time, and I was a CIO. You come home, you complain about work to your wife, and she's listening. And she said, if you have all this technology out there, and all this technology, because they grow up in that, they just adopt to take new technology, latest iPhone. And she said, if all this technology is out there, remember she's 10 years old, and she said, why are you struggling to put it into organizations? I'll never forget that. I just
Right.
stopped, when yes, it's culture. 'Cause we know.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
How
so
hard?
yeah, now you put this lone ranger with the CDO on his or her back, and you say solve all our problems. No, it's a team sport. You got to change your culture to allow for that. It's
Right.
many things coming together to make that. So the other word I used to use, and I was talking to my friend about it now, that they said, please don't use that. It sounds like a religion. I said I was a digital evangelist.
Right.
Right? So it's like it's
It's
just
a heavy
meant like
title.
you're so passionate about it that it will just happen. It's not the title that's going to make it happen.
Right. We're here talking to Ridwaan about the role of CIOs in the 2020s. We're going to continue the conversation when we return after a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. We're here with Ridwaan out of the Third Stage South Africa office, and we're here talking about the role of CIOs in the 2020s. Here's an interesting question from Kevin on YouTube. And he asked the question, can you elaborate on practices and approaches to influence and gain peer buy-in for IT initiatives, such as from sales, finance, et cetera, and working through the political landscape within an organization? It's a pretty big question, pretty broad question, but curious to hear if you have any sort of general knee-jerk thoughts to that question.
So I'll give you an example, maybe like when I join an organization, right? So the second time around as a CIO, I learned a lot from my first time. So obviously to break down those barriers and things like it, their silos exist in all organizations. So and even in the interview process, they would say like, what would you do in your first 30 days, 60 days? Listen. That's what I would do. So you don't come in as the expert. So what I did is I took my notepad and I set up a meeting with all the executives, all the senior managers, and I went to each one of them and I said, talk to me. What are your pain points? So I started off with, like they would say, what was wrong with IT. So even if it's like when we order a laptop, it takes 14 days. That is very crucial because and I always said this, like we've had board meetings, for example. If I go to a board meeting and I'm asking for 200-300 million, and that board member has a laptop that wasn't fixed, I'm going to struggle. I'm dealing with human beings. It's a very simple thing. So
Right.
I would do simple things. So I would go to them, and then all I would do is I wouldn't say, I'm here, I know the answer. Tell me what the issues are. And I would make notes, and then I would address that issue. Then I would make sure, okay, guys, we need to look at the help this. But I would bundle it together. I didn't go. I'm not. I hope I'm not getting the wrong. But I didn't go and said, okay, you must fix this. You must. I looked at it holistically. Right, this is what we need to do. So I shifted IT to that they became a partner, because most
Right.
organizations, there was years ago that CIOs, what they used to call them, either career is over, and I always believe it's because we were known also as Dr. No. People remember that you just said no to everything. No, 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 you can't have that. So the first thing was to change the IT organization to become more of a partner, work with them, listen to them, understand what it is. Other things I did, for example, I knew the board was very influential. So, and they would always come to the meetings with a problem. Okay, the board pack. So what I did is I would see when the meetings were, and then I would outside the let's say there was a boardroom. Outside that, I would have a guy with I would say IT help desk, and I had a guy sitting there, and then
Mhm.
somebody would come, and then they'd say, I've got this problem. They'd sort it out. This because maybe on that day I was gonna come in and ask for some money, so I made sure. So I think it's we're human beings. We should listen to each other, so we shouldn't forget that it's not about being the expert to win them over. Go there and just listen to them. Listen 80% of that conversation, and checking, and then going back and then addressing those issues. That's how I won them over. The second way is that I spoke. Then I made a note of the words that they use. What is it they use? And then I would use their language back to them in the boardroom at Exco, things like that. Bit of a short answer. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's creating. It's about creating relationships, like anything in life.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
creating that. Yeah.
And a lot of what you're saying here is stimulating a response from the audience here. I want to just cover a couple comments and sort of elaborating a little bit on some of your points so far, Ridwaan. Gus over on LinkedIn says, for me, I would say a chief digital officer would focus more on looking at all the processes and convert them to digital or analog digital and eliminate analog dashboards. So that's an interesting take on what CIO role could be. Kyler from LinkedIn says, I think it's so powerful when a leader says, I don't know, because to normalize that vulnerability for employees. So I think that's a great point there. And there's another comment here. This is an interesting one that I wanted to dive into here for a second. This is from Ryan over on LinkedIn. He says, my former position as COO also encompassed the role of CIO when I was in a manufacturing environment. And I don't know about you, Ridwaan, but some of the best CIOs I've worked with were the ones that really understood the business. I mean, they could understand that all the nuances of how the business worked and where the warts were and what the strengths were, sort of what the competitive advantage of the organization was. And they didn't know, some of the best ones I've worked with didn't know a lot about technology. They weren't up to date on all the latest and greatest technologies, but they really understood the business and they could lead with that business view that then sort of translated into, okay, now let's figure out what technology is going to best enable that. But what are your thoughts on that, that sort of COO mindset within the CIO role?
No, it makes a lot of sense, because what I was going to talk about is where is the CIO role going, and one of the roles I see is COO or CEO. Maybe CEO we've seen here and there, maybe not quite, but the COO seems a more natural fit. That's where I see that going. So the fact that the COO was also the CIO, yes, we've actually seen some of these positions advertised now in South Africa. It says COO/CIO. It's actually, because what is operations today? It's all actually digital, isn't it? It's all automated. So to be a good COO, you need to kind of wear two hats. I see. Yeah. No, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Hilton over on LinkedIn has a comment. Kudos for the comment on leadership. It is always about culture and recognizing the opportunity to be the culture catalyst. Sadly, some cultures will not endorse curiosity, vulnerability, and a questioning orientation. It's a great point.
Yeah.
If you have that kind of culture that's not open to questioning the status quo or really thinking outside the box, again, back to that point earlier, you can create all the titles, all the roles you want, but it's not going to be effective unless you also look to change the culture and the DNA of the organization. I think that's a great point.
100%. And so what we see happening, like with this big financial organization that I worked with, it's not just IT that's old school, it's the organization. Because remember, some of them are 100 years plus. I'm not saying the people there have been there from the beginning, but that culture, it perpetuates itself. So it's like this culture that you just know can't change. So what we see is that, and it intends not to be, it's not very it's like a risk averse. So what we see is like they're almost like a CDO coming in and then starting a startup. Like a lot of these big organizations we see here in Africa is like these smaller companies are starting up. We see that. So one of the biggest, interestingly, with all our financial services and everything that's happening on our continent, the biggest investment in Africa is into fintechs or startups. They don't have those issues of cultures. It's a 10-man thing. Hey, this thing doesn't work. Let's just change this. So I think that if you're struggling with the culture, the best thing you can do is to spin a startup. That's what some of them. It's just my experience is I don't know how this culture is going to change. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's easier said than done, and you really need the whole executive team's buy-in in order for that to happen. The CIO or chief digital officer alone is not going to change that culture. You need that alignment at the top and that consensus and that sort of focus at the executive level on down that we are going to change this culture. And if you're in a CIO role, how about this as a question as a follow-up to that though, Ridwaan? If you're being asked to take on a CIO or CDO role within an organization, let's just say you're looking for a new job and you're considering going to this new company in a CIO or CDO role, but the culture doesn't feel right, or it doesn't feel like the culture is going to support that. What do? Do you go ahead and take the role and assume that you're going to fight the battle and you're going to be able to change the culture? Or do you sort of wait for that opportunity where the executive team's on board and aligned and focus on changing that culture?
So a lot of my questions will be like, because for those types of roles, nowadays you'll have a board member in there, or you'd have, somebody from Exco, not just the CEO. So I would ask these questions up front, definitely. Like, what is the appetite for this? How are we gonna do this? And you can get a sense from that. Here's the thing that we find is that there's a lot of lip service in this area for digital transformation. So I'll give you a stat, for example, when I was at Gartner. So a lot of these CEOs would say that they're doing digital transformation. So digital transformation is like what we would term changing your operating model, finding new revenue streams, just changing your business. When these analysts would go out and interview these CEOs, only 30% of them were actually doing that. The rest was doing old school stuff. So, and here's the thing. I don't know if people are familiar or yourself, Erika, the innovator's dilemma. There's
I love that book.
You know that book, right?
Christian Claytonson or
Christian Claytonson. Yeah. So the thing is, people think that people are cultures a certain way because people are evil. It's not. It's simple. If I make my money from selling this thing and my kids' school fees are paid and this person comes in and says, no, we need to change all of this. Now we're going to do this. It's going to create fear and resistance, and that's and you find that companies who don't innovate and change, unfortunately, are falling by the wayside. I was looking at the stats now the day where they said companies that used to last over 100 years of that. I think the average now is about 13 years or something. It's crazy. I can't remember the exact stat, but it's that fast. So it's literally that innovate or die has become it's the truth.
Yeah. Well, to your point about Innovator's Dilemma, if you haven't read that book, to the audience listening, it's a really good book, and it talks about how the cycle times of innovation are compressing. And it also talks about just some of the problems that some of the bleeding edge companies have in being the first to market, or having a technology or a innovation that's too far ahead of what the market is ready for. And then what ends up happening is you have another company that comes in behind them and builds a better mousetrap, or sort of perfects whatever the product or service is, and then creates something that's the market is ready for. And then they're the ones that are successful. And there's a lot of, examples they give in there, and you see these examples every day. But I think one of the interesting things about that book is focused more on sort of like a product oriented focus. But what you're saying is that innovation concept is moving beyond just product development and product innovation, but more about just organizational innovation. How do we as an organization roll with the changes and
Pivot,
continue to
change.
emerge and involve? Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. No. So it's almost like this term, cannibalize yourself. So you need to almost change. It's difficult. Like you have to bring it back to why people don't want to change, because right now I'm selling this product, and now you're talking about we're going to get rid of that. We're going to do this. So maybe it's having both. I'm not sure, but whether we like it or not, if you're not innovating, I mean, we've seen that. I can't remember his name now. Was Porter's 5 Forces. He said, "Go and look at this parts of look at your competitor." You don't know who your competitor is anymore. Who would have thought Google and Apple and these people are playing in these markets that they're playing in? You don't know where you're. And here's the scary thing: those guys are not even thinking about you. They're not looking at you to try to learn and emulate from you. They're just coming up with something new and eradicating and getting rid of you. It's scary. That's a scary place to be.
Yeah, and the lines are blurring in terms of what defines an industry. So you look at, we had a guest on here a few weeks ago on this podcast. We had a guest on Walker Reynolds, and he was talking about Industry 4.0 and innovation within manufacturing. Really good interview. But one of the things he talked about was Tesla. He started talking about Tesla, the company, and how Tesla is not a car company like most people think. It's really a data company. It's a tech company.
It's a data company.
But it's really interesting when you think about just that as an example. The lines are just getting blurred into terms of what our industry really is. And back to Michael Porter's 5 Forces, that makes the 5 Forces model somewhat difficult to apply, just because
I don't know how you apply that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, looking a couple comments here. Here's a comment from Ghassan on LinkedIn. I'm not going to show it on the screen because it won't fit. It's a long comment, so I'm going to try and summarize it, but because it's really good.
Okay.
But he says, back to the title of this podcast, the CIO can help in these domains, and he lists 4 things. He talks about learning and growth, the process perspective, customer perspective, and then financial perspective in terms of increasing value. Let me see if I can show that. I don't think it's going to show here.
I'd agree with that.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on that comment?
No, I'd agree with it. It makes sense. And just something I forgot about. I wrote a blog, was about 6-7 years ago. I said your as a CIO, start talking more about the customer. So one of the things I would do, and if there are CIOs on the call, or heads of IT, go to your IT department tomorrow, call them all together and ask them who's the customer. You'll be surprised by what. So as soon as they started to say Jane in accounting, or I said, that's not my customer. The customer is the one who pays the invoice when it goes out from this. That's where we need to focus on. So I would agree with that on that 4. So your strategy, your digital strategy, I mean, for want of all these words, and that is a customer strategy, isn't it? Because that's where you should focus. It's about bringing that experience to the customer. Yes, you need to keep your internal, and I never call them customers, I call them partners. My internal partners happy, keep them, you make sure that the finance system was up, whatever they could do their month in. Then, but I think as a CIO, CDO, your focus has to be on your customer, your true customer, your real customer. Because if you're not focused on that customer, someone like Google or Apple or somebody else is focused on them. That's right. Yeah. So I think that's very, very, very key.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. So I guess just to summarize this all and sort of wrap up the thread here, the conversation here, what do you see as the most important, or let me rephrase this. What do you see as the future of the CIO and Chief Digital Officer role? I mean, in 5 or 10 years from now, how do you see these trends that you're talking about, all this evolution of the role? How do you see it trajecting into the future?
So difficult to predict, right? Because I always have the saying, if somebody comes and tells you what the future is, you tell them to leave your office. So I have to eat my own words. But if I look at the literature, things like that, they said these terms will fall away. Everybody will become digital in the organization. Let's say 10 years, maybe not 5, maybe 10. There won't be things like Chief Digital Officer, CIO. I think it would have just morphed into everything is digital. I think so. If you look at if you look at the workforce that's coming into you, but I remember it's one organization I worked at, and we had some pretty good firewalls. We had put everything up, from a security point, and we were so focused on the external. And then we ran some things one day, and my CTO came to me and he said, "Look here, so people within my organization were hacking to get out, so that they could get to download their stuff and things like that." So
Hmm.
so it's crazy that you can have this one person that says we need to become digital, and here's the new digital world. Think of 10 years from now. It doesn't make sense because everything is digital. If you look at these youngsters coming into the workplace, so yeah, I'm not sure what that role. I think it will just be a natural. They won't even use it anymore. They won't say digital strategy. They'll just say business strategy.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah,
That's super
I think
interesting.
it.
So it's almost back to that creative destruction thought or thread. It's almost like ideally the CIO, CDO role sort of destroys itself and
Will destroy
becomes just
itself.
embedded within the organization. A lot like, that's one thing we talk about in some of our other thought leadership in content that we put out at Third Stage is we talk about change management and whether or not change management should really be a standalone, separate team, separate skill set, separate work stream within a transformation, or should it be embedded just in the DNA of the organization? Should it be the business that's really driving the change? Same goes here with technology or sort of that technology visionary sort of role. It's almost like that has to be embedded in more of the
It's
organization
going to
and
be
not
embedded.
standalone.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really interesting.
It's just a thought. Yeah, like I said, I have to eat my own words when everybody talks about the future, especially now. We don't know. But
Right.
but yeah. But what I can see is digital will be pervasive.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Well, so closing thoughts here, sort of the last question I'll ask is given everything we've talked about, we've covered a lot of different things ranging from how the role has changed, what the role is, how you see it evolving in the future, what skills are most important. You talked a lot about some of the softer skills that are important, but what advice would you give to a new CIO or an aspiring CIO today, just where we are in the world today, and given all these trends and the backdrop you've described, what sort of advice would you give to someone that wants to sort of move into that role?
So yeah, so I just want to differentiate. So CTO role, then I would say become more tech because that's what the startups are looking for. All right. So,
Good
but
point.
if we talk specifically CIO, CDO type role, then go and do an MBA. So even 10 years ago, it wasn't there when I started, but in my second time I went for an interview, one of the things was an MBA. So become more business, and I think I have a sense of curiosity that you don't. I- yeah, it's a difficult thing to say. Follow this path to become a CIO. But what I would stress, if you're in an organization and you like that organization that you're in, learn the business. Learn as much as you can and what digital can do for that business. That will naturally take you into that role. That's my
Mm.
feeling. Is
Yeah.
become more of a think more like a business person. Don't think like a techie. Oh, this AI. Maybe as a hobby on the side, if you're still interested in that kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, but get more involved in your business and understand what digital can do for your business. That's what I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
and,
a great.
and obviously sorry, and the soft skills, things like empathy and that, because of the pandemic and that, those are now coming to the fore. So do leadership skills, do public speaking courses, because it's all about being a good storyteller and communicator.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a great point. And those are sort of non-traditional skills or non-traditional areas of development that CIOs typically haven't thought about in years past.
correct.
They've thought more about, let me go get the data science certification or the AI
Yeah,
machine learning certification or get certified in a certain type of technology. You can still certainly do that. I don't think
yeah,
I don't think either of us are discouraging CIOs
no,
or technical types to
not
remain technical, but I think really broadening your view and their purview of what the role is and what the skills are required to be successful. I think that's what we're saying here is that there's a lot there to it.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ridwaan. That was a great conversation, a lot to digest and take in there, and a lot of really good stuff. This is a topic we have not covered in previous episodes of the show, so really appreciate your time here today. In fact, there's so much good stuff from that conversation to unpack that Kyler and I are going to do just that. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Bad to the bone. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler Cheatham. We just had Ridwaan Bardien on the show from our South Africa office at Third Stage. And what were your thoughts about some of that conversation and some of those threads about CIOs and the evolving roles of CIOs, the skills they need, all that stuff we talked about? What were your thoughts on that, Kyler?
Yeah, I mean, what interesting experience. I didn't even know that Ridwaan had a lot of that CIO coaching experience. I think that's so unique. And in the fact that he really talks about kind of the business technologist skills involved in that evolution from a CIO or a CDO, Chief Digital Officer. I also loved our audience throwing out some CDO names because Chief Data Officer, that now might make a lot of sense.
Right.
So I think that there's lots of opportunities to kind of expand on that business technical side, making sure that those attachments are accountable for some sort of ROI, so they understand, right, the impact and the overall revenue or ROI business value that new technology needs to bring, or that existing technology needs to either be alleviated regarding like technical debt, or that needs to be consolidated, those types of different things.
Yeah, and I guess I never stopped to think about how the role has evolved and how the focus and the priorities of the CIO and CDO roles have changed over time. And so that was really fascinating to have that conversation with him and sort of walk through the evolution of the role and where it's headed in the future.
Absolutely. And how unique it is to each organization. It used to be, like you kind of went through in that overall timeline, a really standardized role. You know, you had a CIO, you had an IT team, it supported whatever your technological infrastructure was. And that's just kind of how it worked was typical for each sort of business structure or organizational design. And now a lot of times, due to things like outsourcing or to more of a technical friendly, if you will, or I guess tech savvy dashboards, those types of things, that need for those hard analysts are less. Not that they're not important, but that structure really needs to match the DNA of the organization. You know, are you a very data heavy organization? Then your CIO should have that larger infrastructure. But if you're, more manufacturing product focused, it could be lots of different things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. One of the audience questions was something, or it was more of a comment, I think, about how he used to be the person, the audience member was saying how he used to be a COO in a manufacturing environment that was responsible for IT, which I thought was really interesting. And like I said in the interview, that's some of the best IT directors and CIOs, IT managers, CDOs, whatever IT leadership role you want to talk about. Some of the most effective ones that I've seen, and especially in terms of transformation and transforming a business, have been the ones that really understand operations, even if, whether they've been former COOs or whether they've just gotten to know the business over time.
Absolutely. And I think that that's an important piece of advice that Ridwaan said. And if I wasn't doing school drop off during that that live stream, I was about to comment before you guys ended, because I was cracking up, because you said, what was one key takeaway that you would have for anyone considering this? And he said like 5.
I know.
So I was like, that's perfect. He fits right in. No.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I think that key takeaway though of learning the operations, learn the most you can about the business, and then you will create and increase your overall value to the organization. And I think that's a really easy way for especially young professionals. If you are interested in following a career path, just learn more about your cross-functional areas of whatever organization you work for. And a lot of times I think, especially young professionals in that area, or youngsters as he calls them,
Right.
they don't realize that if you go to these executives, if you go to team leaders, those types of things, and say, hey, I really want to learn about what you do, I have to say 99% of the time, they're going to say, oh, great. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to do an interview. Very rarely do you find someone that's not willing to kind of give you that insight or collaborate with you, especially on that leadership team. I think a lot of times because they understand the importance of that cross-functional knowledge.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And one question that I thought about asking, but I didn't want to muddy the waters too much, but maybe I'll ask you and get your thoughts. But I don't know if you recall this or not, but I know you recall the interview, but you mentioned it before, the interview with Walker Reynolds from, it's probably episode number 68, 67, 68, somewhere in there. So it was a few weeks ago, we had Walker Reynolds on, and he was talking about Industry 4.0. And one of the things he said that it took me a minute to sort of digest it. Now I'm sort of like comparing it to what Ridwaan said, is he made a comment in that interview about how he views technology and deep understanding of technology as something that's really important to anyone leading a business, because otherwise you can't understand how technology can transform your business. Whereas I tend to think of it maybe more like Ridwaan does, which is, yeah, you need to understand the technology, but it's more important that you understand the business. Walker seemed to have I don't know if he necessarily said that technology is more important than the business understanding, but he really emphasized that need to understand. So I was just curious if you had any thoughts on that sort of potential diverging point of view that these two different guests had on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think both are very insightful in that piece. And I guess the way that I took it when it comes to Walker, and maybe I have a bias because I am a creative in technology, so I don't have those hard skills. I truly believe that technology is here to leverage the business initiatives. But to Walker's point, I think what he's saying is he still codes because he's still understanding what the workforce is going through, which makes him a more impactful leader. And that's just kind of how I took it. But I think both perspectives, are really important to understand. And again, goes back to, what does your organization need from that service leadership model? What do they need you to be able to understand?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the commonality or the common ground that we're all agreeing on is you need both. You need the technical understanding, technical knowledge, but you definitely need the business understanding and business knowledge. But the business knowledge and understanding has been underrated in the past, or under-focused on, underutilized. So I think that's just a good lesson for anyone that wants to become a CIO or chief digital officer, IT director, or whatever the case may be.
I'm curious, Eric, since you have a unique perspective of hiring CIOs, COOs, those types of things, what do you look for in that true chief executive officer? Not many people have had the experience of hiring that level of a C-suite, and I assume it has to be pretty in depth. The interview process, the relationship building. Can you give us a little kind of look behind the curtain of how you've done that in the past successfully?
Yeah, the hard skills are a lot easier to quantify and measure and assess, because either you know something or you don't. When it comes to a knowledge base that you're looking for, it's pretty easy to vet that out. The harder stuff to vet out is the more important stuff, which is, what kind of leader is this person? What's their leadership style? How does it align with our business? So you end up asking a lot of questions of how would you describe your leadership style? Give me some examples of how you coach people in tough situations, or how you deal with adversity or resistance to change. Give me some examples. So that sort of behavioral understanding is really important. And then, like I said, if I were interviewing a technically focused role like a CIO or IT director, I would also want to understand, help me understand, give me an example of how you have successfully deployed technology and the impact it had on the business. So operationally, what sort of changes did the business go through as a result of the technology? If they get hung up on, I designed this really cool user interface and it was using cutting edge technology and people loved it, that's not a good answer for me. It's not good enough. I would need to hear like it really streamlined our ability to get visibility into, our demand planning or whatever it is. And we were able to reduce inventory by this amount. And if they can really tie it back to business objectives and goals, results, that's something else I look for as well. So those are a couple of things that come to mind.
Yeah, and that's right, on point of what Ridwaan said. The most successful CIOs he's seen, that he's mentored, they really understand the overall business impact and how they're responsible for those KPIs when it comes to technology operations, those types of things. So, it's such a great conversation. I feel like we could talk to Ridwaan for hours. Sometimes I do on our calls, but if you have questions about additional CIO coaching or the value of IT and you want to talk to Ridwaan directly, you can always drop him a line. I did put, if you are watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, that live stream, his contact information in there, or you can visit our website. He's also on our team page, and he's also very active on LinkedIn too. So he's got great kind of content that he puts out, as well as some top 10 lists. So highly recommend following him and consuming all that great insight he shares.
Yeah, and he has a unique name. He's the only person on our global team that has the name Ridwaan, which is spelled Ridwaan. So if you just Google Ridwaan Third Stage Consulting, you'll find him. Or if you look on LinkedIn, you'll find him there. So those are a couple other ways to look him up if you don't see him on our website or you don't see the link in the live stream. So good. Well, thanks for that debrief, and thanks again to Ridwaan for being on the show. That was a great discussion and a lot of good takeaways, and hopefully it's helped some of you aspiring CIOs and current CIOs and past CIOs. Hopefully it's helped you all understand the role a little bit better and sort of where it's headed and ways you can be more successful in that role. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have Adam Cheatham on the show, and Adam is a director of strategy and transformation at Third Stage Consulting, and he's going to be on talking about Microsoft Dynamics 365 implementation challenges. And even if you're not interested in Microsoft D365 as a specific platform, stick around, because a lot of what he talks about is going to be relevant to any sort of enterprise application deployment. Even though Third Stage Consulting is a technology agnostic firm, we deal with all sorts of implementations ranging from Microsoft to SAP to Oracle, et cetera. The reason we wanted to sort of pick on this one focused technology is because there's some unique nuances that you need to be aware of when you're implementing Microsoft D365 when compared to SAP or Oracle or Workday or insert enterprise technology name here. And so that's something that we wanted to unpack a bit, is just understanding the nuances. And if anything, I hope that the conversation will help everyone here understand what some of the different nuances are and the way you need to just navigate different types of technologies differently based on the strengths and weaknesses of that product. So I highly encourage you to listen, even if you're not interested in Microsoft products, because it is going to be relevant even if you're deploying SAP or Oracle or something different. So we'll have Adam on the show after we take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Kyler, and Kyler, we're going to have Adam Cheatham on the show here. And I just realized that you guys have like the same last name. It's crazy. It's Cheatham. You both have the name Cheatham. I mean, what are the odds of two Cheathams on the team?
I know. Well, the other day, one of our newer clients was like, "Is that your sister?" He's like, "That's my wife." So,
Right.
yeah.
Wait, you guys are married?
Yeah, I know. I just look so much younger than him. It's just like people are like, "Wow, that must be your like teenage sister or something like that."
Right. Now, does HR know that you guys are married? I mean, I feel like I hate to expose the dirty laundry and all that here live on a podcast, but just want to make sure HR is aware.
Well, they are aware usually when our children are, stampeding through the office, they kind of figure that out. So luckily, we have a very family friendly environment here at Third Stage.
Yes, I know when my kids were younger, they loved coming in the office and they thought it was so cool. Now they have now that they're cool teenagers, they have no desire to come here, but they loved it when they were that age. Well, good. Well, we're going to have Adam on the show, and he's going to talk about Microsoft Dynamics 365 implementation challenges. And this is actually an interview that you conducted with him for our Digital Stratosphere sister podcast. And we wanted to play you the clip here on this podcast because there's a lot of good lessons learned that relate to the topics we cover here. And of course, we'll debrief on it afterwards. So let's cut to the clip of you interviewing Adam Cheatham talking about challenges of Microsoft D365 implementations.
Thanks for having me.
So Adam is a director of transformation and strategy here at Third Stage. So Adam, can you just give us a little bit of an introduction around your role at Third Stage?
Yeah, so as a director, my responsibility is for helping build teams around our projects and our programs. So when we have somebody come in and has an implementation that they're looking to have some help with, I work to understand their challenges and what it is where their gaps are and what they need, and help put together a team to solve for those needs and then guide the project through to completion strategically. So that's generally what I do in a nutshell, but we can talk a little bit more in detail about it as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we're talking about a specific system, and I want to kind of give just some background. Microsoft Dynamics 365 is currently experiencing some implementation and resourcing challenges. When we have these conversations, the objective is to make sure that our client community and audience has the tools and tactics to overcome these challenges. It does not mean that we don't support D365. Actually, on our top 10 ERP systems of 2020, they're actually number one. So I just want to precursor the conversation with this is just something that we want to bring out of and lift the veil on how you can kind of overcome this. So that said, that precursor, Adam, can you give us just the landscape of the current challenges with implementing D365?
Yeah, that's I think that there's a lot wrapped up in what you just said, but overall, you had kind of this boom of implementations that kind of came because of the pandemic, and that stressed an already challenged resource pool, particularly as it pertains to Microsoft Dynamics platforms. Even before the pandemic, we were helping a lot of clients with issues in staffing Dynamics 365 implementations, just from a quality perspective, rather hit or miss. And now that we see you follow on with the boom of ERP and digital transformation projects that happen as part of the pandemic, and you're stressing an already stressed system, if you will. So what we're finding with a lot of folks is some of our clients have really good access to Dynamics 365 teams, and then others do not. So that's really the crux of it, and making sure that you have good team members from your system integrator is a really important component of implementation success.
So is this problem, just to clarify, is it unique to Microsoft Dynamics 365, or is this kind of an industry pain point?
I'd say it's an industry pain point because of how projects are generally staffed. We've seen it with other software platforms as well. I think the difference for Microsoft Dynamics is that this was a challenge before the pandemic. And with most other providers, if you found a good solid system integrator, they had access to good solid resources, and that wasn't as big an issue with other platforms. with Microsoft, it seemed to you could find a good implementer and then still end up with bad resources just because of the nature of what you've done as it pertains to the marketplace and staffing that project on the whole.
And why do you think that is? Do you have any insight to that specifically?
I don't know if I'd say what I have as insight into why that is from a perspective of that setup. I suspect that there are a number of things at hand with the Microsoft Dynamics stuff. One of them is that it is a very strong platform, and so it's been in demand for quite some time. The fact that it's Microsoft and most people have all kinds of Microsoft tools as it is, and Dynamics becomes a feed into that, I think speaks to the success of the platform. There's also the manner in which Microsoft can be implemented. You don't actually have to be a system integrator to implement Microsoft Dynamics. We have a client that is implementing Microsoft Dynamics Business Central, and they don't have a system integrator at all. They decided to do all of their work in-house. So that's kind of part of the challenge. I think that another part of it is Microsoft doesn't get as involved in their implementations as other system integrators or software vendors, and there's a little bit of a distancing there. So that might be another part of it. This is all speculation, though. I don't have anything that I've seen that is definitively this is why it's hard to implement Microsoft Dynamics. The other part of it is just that it is a large and complex software package, and large and complex software packages are by nature difficult to implement. So.
And what happens when you do have these implementation challenges as a client? Does your timeline get pushed back? Does your budget increase? Can you just tell us some side effects of that overall scenario?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think that there's a core assumption there that you have to recognize, which is you notice it early enough. But generally, if it's something that you notice early enough, you can make changes to the project team, and you can request that those changes are made from your system integrator. So if you find that you do have somebody that is underperforming, maybe they don't understand your business and they're not connecting with it. We've seen that recently with some of our clients and saying, look, I don't know why it is I'm explaining how this works again. We're not special in what we do, but it seems like the challenge is in understanding our business. When you start noticing those types of things and start noticing that the quality that you're getting is low, and that you need to make a change, if you make those changes fast enough, early enough, and accurately enough, you can limit the impacts to your implementation. But if it's something that kind of goes on for a little while, we'll continue with the example of somebody who doesn't understand your business the way that they need to design software around it. That person is going to continue to work with a lesser understanding of your business, and as they continue to work and build your software, that misunderstanding is going to be represented in what gets built. And then what you see is start to see those types of things come out in testing. And that's not unique to Microsoft. It's an overall implementation thing. Actually talked to a gentleman recently in Europe that was implementing SAP, and their integrator, they could not find somebody on their integration team that understood their business. And that really caused a lot of challenges, and their go lives continue to get pushed back because their system integrator can't find teammates that understand how they work. On a Microsoft side of things, as you start to configure components of software, you want to make sure that understanding is strong and well aligned towards what it is you do as an organization. Because at the end of the day, even the smallest tweak of understanding can lead to something being built inaccurately.
Absolutely. And I want to dig into some of those tactics or strategies to be able to overcome some of those issues or barriers in just a second. But I just want to take a minute to recognize some of our global audience joining us. So we've got some Texas here in the United States, all the way over in Norway, some other United States in the East Coast. So just a reminder, if you do have questions or want to join the discussion, just go ahead and comment on whatever platform you're watching on, and we will address your questions here. A lot of times when we talk about a software specific piece of content, we can get a lot of insight from our user community or anyone that has experienced any issues as well. So feel free to engage with whatever social platform you're viewing from today. So let's back up just a little bit, Adam. When it comes to Microsoft addressing the lack of resources or maybe the lower quality of integrators, in your opinion, have they done anything to kind of help resolve that in the marketplace?
That might be part of the challenge. I haven't seen anything that's Microsoft leading the charge on fixing any of this. And the fact that it's been kind of consistent from Microsoft for quite some time is a part of the challenge. Microsoft has a different type of relationship with their system integrators than most vendors, in that they don't. It is very, very, very rare that Microsoft implements its own software, if at all. They're entirely dependent on their system integrator network, and part of that is as a result of the antitrust lawsuits that Microsoft had back in the day, and they were kind of forced to create some checks and balances in the way that they approach software, and their ERP is something that is impacted by those types of decisions. So the way that they they have it set up is kind of an arm's length type of thing, even from a perspective of when you sign a contract with Microsoft for enterprise software, that's actually managed by another company, the signature and the maintenance of that contract. So you have Microsoft that you buy the software for, you have this other third party that you contract with Microsoft through, and then you have a system integrator that is responsible for building the software itself. So I think this is that kind of arm's length nature has led Microsoft to be less invested in solving this challenge. But it also is a part of the creation of it, because that dependence on their system integrator network creates a lot of openings for a lot of great things. But as it opens for great things, it also opens for all of the things that come in with that. And I think that's part of the challenge that we're talking about today.
And so is that model unique to Microsoft, or is that pretty typical with other systems as well?
It is pretty typical with other systems to have a system integrator network. Microsoft is a little bit less directly involved in their implementations, whereas it's less common for you to know who you can call at Microsoft if you have a problem with your integrator. Whereas with others, Infor, SAP, Oracle, and all of the others, there's usually somebody that's a bit more visible from the vendor if you're working through the system integrator themselves. I think there's also a thought process where when the system integrator is separated the way that Microsoft has them, you have less of a direct connection to the folks that code the software. So let me see if I can think of a way of framing it. Let's say Infor, for example, is building a lot of new programs, the new functionality within their cloud suite. And Infor is creating that, and Infor knows how to implement it. That knowledge then gets passed down from Infor to the system integrators once it's built and effective. And then the system integrators get a chance to learn it from the experts that designed it and built it, right? And have implemented it and all of those things. Whereas with Microsoft, you don't have that same internal consulting services network that is expected to be now that Microsoft knows how to do it all themselves, then you add in the system integrator network and that knowledge transfer can happen. I think there's a gap there.
Interesting. So when you are looking at a software selection, which we do a lot here at Third Stage, do you take into consideration the challenges of implementation when recommending a specific software? And how much does that affect your recommendation for our clients as an independent and agnostic consultant?
Yeah, so you have to do two things when you do this. You have to select the right software, and then you have to implement it well. Those are two separate things. Software functionality is, when the functionality is there, Microsoft will be recommended, and our assumption is that we're going to help find a partner that can do that. You can to plan away from the risks that come with the Microsoft implementation is if they don't exist for other system integrators is not something that we do. However, what we do consider is that if we're going to implement a software system that we know has some challenges, and Microsoft has its own unique challenges, every other software package has its own unique challenges. But we work with our clients to plan around that. It often becomes part of the risk management tactics and part of the risk log, quality of resources and those types of things. And we do recommend that if you start to interview people before you sign, and who your key roles are. I always like to think about the systems architect as well as the program manager from the system integrator. Both of those roles are folks that you should interview and become very comfortable with before you sign. That's usually the best way of doing it. But those are two key critical roles that as we work with our clients and when we've suggested Microsoft Dynamics in the past, our focus then becomes on, let's make sure we got the right team behind this. We don't want to be stuck with bad resources for a long time. So that it becomes more of the implementation readiness and the implementation management plan to accommodate for those things that we know may become challenges along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam's really hoarse from yelling at our kids. So I
don't yell at our children.
Lift behind the curtain. Adam and I are married. We have two toddlers, but he's right. He does not yell. Just a little joke to lighten all of this very technical content.
We're here having a conversation with Kyler and Adam talking about Microsoft D365 implementations. We're going to continue the conversation when we return from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, as well as the audio podcast platforms. And we are here with Adam Cheatham and Kyler Cheatham talking about implementation challenges of Microsoft D365.
A comment here from one of our LinkedIn users. So the lack of a system integrator has been challenging. I've had to deal with that too. Great call out, Adam. I look forward to learning more on how to deal with these kinds of challenges. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about if you don't have a system integrator and maybe the quality of system integrator isn't on par with what you need as an organization. What are some things that you can do to overcome that?
Well, I was recommending my clients that they consider that their system integrator is the technical team, right? And you want to have technically skilled folks implementing that software. That should come not just from the system integrator, but also from the client side, right? You guys have to be able to match that as a client to be able to understand what's the way the software is being built. And frankly, you're going to have to maintain that software and play a role in that in the future as well. So being engaged at that level, I think, is important. But what we tend to recommend for our clients regardless of software package, but when that is a tactic for mitigating risk in general, is to have an independent third party run your program management and your change management practices, so that you're managing the implementation on the people side, and the technical side is left to the folks that are skilled in it. If you are asking your system integrator to do things that they are not skilled in, they won't do them well. That's a simple thing, right? That's I'm not a hockey player. I've never been good on ice skates. So if you put me out on the ice with a hockey stick, you know what what you should expect from me. Not a lot. But on the other hand, if you take somebody who's been doing it their whole life and put them in a position where they where it fits their skill set, and you just ask them, hey, you got one job. That's the technical implementation. And we're going to bring in folks that are skilled in the other areas of program management and change management. That's a real good way of mitigating that. It also creates a scenario where you have another set of eyes watching out for you. One of the things that's really hard about implementations is just the sheer fact that it's difficult to know what's just hard and what's going wrong. And telling the difference, and having an independent third party with experience in that and knowing the difference is really helpful to be able to say, are we having a challenge here just because we should be having a challenge, or do we really have a problem that we need to confront and solve?
Absolutely. So digging into kind of that PMO role, is that something that you do, that you come in and help the client not only select the software, but then also interview or kind of vet, if you will, SIs?
Yep, we do that. That's one of the services that we offer. We generally recommend it to anybody that's hiring a system integrator that they take a real close look at that partnership, because that system integrator is going to be a part of your life for 10 to 20 years. But yes, we do those types of things, interviews, referenceable clients. I always like the idea of referencing a client, and not from a perspective of would you hire these people again or not, because no system integrator or business is going to intentionally give you a bad reference, but ask them about what their experience was when they faced challenges in the implementation. How did this system integrator help you through some of the conversations, which were, well, we could code something brand new just for you, or we could help you change your business processes, which is which. I'm of the mind that there's a confirmation bias on the system integrator side, which is, I've seen this software do anything, so I can therefore make it do anything. So my recommendation is that we just make it do what you want it to. That's not always the right path and can create problems. And when you're talking about a system that requires the level of configuration and encoding that Microsoft does, that's not the way you want to approach the conversation. You want to know, I need to change this software for good, sound business reasons, as opposed to, oh, the system integrator said that they could do it, so we'll just do that, because that gets expensive.
Absolutely. And so if you are an organization that's talking to a system integrator or engaged with an SI, and you don't have the knowledge, or that's not your day job, right, to interview system integrators, what are some questions or some red flags that you should look for or ask in that interview process?
The project plan. I would go straight for that. And one of the things that I really like about getting a project plan, and a detailed one from your system integrator, is it solves a lot of problems. First of all, if you understand my business well enough, you'll be able to put together a detailed project plan, and you'll be able to tell me exactly how it is you think you're going to do this. And you'll have areas that are for contingencies when we're going to have these types of conversations in those ones. So a project plan that's specific to me as a client shows an understanding that I know your business well enough to actually create a project plan. What the project plan also does is it gives you an idea of what a realistic timeline is. 12 to 18 months is a big window. And what that actually looks like, and when we're actually going to go live, are key components of what you should be thinking about deliberately. So that's I like getting my hands on that project plan up front, so that we can start checking those types of things. It also puts you in a spot where you're better prepared when your project does start to have a detailed project plan. And as you start talking through that with your system integrator, having it up front before you sign a contract so that it can be in there is a real benefit, as opposed to starting that project planning afterwards while it's on the client's dime, if you will. Like, if you're paying for your project plan to be developed at a level of detail that you could have gotten to in the commercial process, then you're paying for something that you may not need to. So I always like to get that level of detail, as much detail as I can. Then it shows the level of quality behind the program management side of things and how it is that system integrator is going to approach a project.
Yeah, definitely. That's great insight for sure. And so important, right? Because that's a key player and a key piece of achieving a successful digital transformation. So I'm curious, when you have a client that might have purchased D365, and maybe they're like mid-tier, mid-market, not a huge company that would be a huge priority for a system integrator. Is there a lack of resources that might push out their timeline? Like, do you ever experience a scenario where they purchase the software, but they can't implement it for a really long time because there is no system integrators available or resources available?
Yeah, that's another thing that we see a good bit of folks that sign a contract thinking that they're going to start within a couple of weeks, because that's generally been the standard, and it getting pushed out. Get that information up front before you sign. Know when your start date is going to be, know who's going to be on your project, and you can eliminate that problem. I've had a number of folks that are implementing software packages that are signed and waiting. They're paying subscription. Like, keep in mind, software is sold by subscription now. So the idea that your software isn't going to be up and your implementation isn't going to start for 3 months doesn't mean anything to the vendor. They're already getting paid. So as far as they're concerned, that's not a problem. From a perspective of getting that start date moved up because of resources, if you haven't done your due diligence in the procurement process, then you're in a position where you have to take the next available in line resource. And you're put in a spot, well, what if that person's not the right one? Well, now you got to make a decision. Do you delay, or do you go with somebody who might be the wrong resource for your project? And that creates other challenges. This same question is kind of reminding me of somebody that I've been speaking with recently, that they have a team which has their system integrator has misjudged their business based on their data. And so they're working to try to figure out how to get the data cleaned up and migrated appropriately. And they don't seem to understand the process. So go live has been delayed multiple times. I think at this point, it was the first couple of delays were out of April, and it was a week at a time. Now kind of gone back and said, so what is it? What is the actual timeline for doing this right? Like, don't tell me what I want to hear, which is we'll be live next week. Tell me what's the truth. And they added another month to say, all right, we'll have it up and running by this date. And the question becomes at this point, well, why is it taking so long? And is it because of a lack of quality of resources? At this point, you're kind of beholden to it in a way which is gives you very few options. And that's getting your Microsoft Dynamics platform up and running is in a month, which is now 2 months after your original go live, creates the problem of, well, what if I decided I wanted to fire these people? I can't. At this point, we're talking not only about my data, but about something that's ready to go live, other than the data, we think. And so I have to keep this team together who has put me in this position by underperforming in the first place, right? So if I change a couple of data guys out and I swap in new ones, how much time does it take for them to learn my business well enough to know how to run my data through this? It's kind of a bit of a catch-22 in that there's not a good option here. So those types of things are we try to identify them earlier if we can, so that we can solve for them before they become a problem.
And I think that's really the critical piece of having that independent third party involved, just because it is sort of an investment in the insurance of your overall project. because if they, are independent, truly consultants, would have the ability and experience to really see these types of things coming, so that, clients aren't in a situation where they have no choice but to go forward on somebody else's timeline and have zero control of their own project.
Yeah.
Something you said really stood out to me there. And so I want you to clarify if you can. So you have to pay for that SaaS service even before you implement it?
Yeah. So, and this, you're just as surprised as some of our clients are.
Okay.
You pay for you pay your first, and depending on terms, you pay your first licensing fees upon signing a contract.
Wow.
And typically you sign your contract with your software vendor. What's the better way of putting it? It's not common to sign with a system integrator and then with the software vendor. It's more often either the other way around, where you sign for software and then the system integrator, or you sign them both together as a package deal, and your payment is due upon signing. This is something that we spend a lot of time talking about internally, about the impacts of subscription software. 5-10 years ago, before this was the mainstay in the marketplace, it was easy to talk to a vendor and say, you know what, all right, we got our licensing fees nailed down. They're perpetual licenses. You buy them once, you own the software. And it was easy to say, but we don't want to pay those license fees until the software is up and running, until we go live, right? It creates an incentive to actually go live, and those types of things. There are some licenses that you'd pay for up front just because you had to have some to use the software and to build it itself. But the bulk of them could be pushed off until go live, at which point then you buy your licenses. Because as far as the system, the vendor is concerned, $1 million in licenses on day one versus on go live, today versus at go live, still $1 million. The number hasn't changed. Whereas with subscription services now, you pay up front, and it's really difficult to get that negotiated out. And then you pay for licenses, whether you're using the software or not. It's either quarterly or annually most of the time, but yeah, you pay them before you use them.
Wow, I had no idea that was the case. That seems like there would be zero accountability on the side of the vendor to help their customers.
They're already getting paid. I mean, we've helped a lot of clients with licensing challenges that had a failed implementation, never went live, and are stuck with licenses that they don't use.
Wow. Well, that's a podcast for another time, for sure. Absolutely, because I have a lot of questions, but I won't completely derail and hijack our conversation here.
We're here having a conversation with Kyler and Adam talking about Microsoft D365 implementations. We're going to continue the conversation when we return from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, as well as the audio podcast platforms. And we are here with Adam Cheatham and Kyler Cheatham talking about implementation challenges of Microsoft D365.
So if you find yourself as an organization, not for the fault of your own, just what you don't know, right? In a situation where they are kind of in this really hard dynamic of being right in between a system integrator that they've already engaged and a software that they're struggling to implement, what are some things that they can do to help move the project forward, or at least triage to make sure they're not blowing their budget or blowing their timeline?
Well, for starters, get a good, clear idea of where your implementation is. Is it on track, and what does it look like? You don't want to find out that you're building the wrong software and testing. That's months and months and months into the project. But at the same time, having a good feel for how well it's going early and often is really a key component of that, so that that, all right, these folks are really understanding my business, and so I feel confident in that. Microsoft in particular has a number of different types of ways of working that are advantageous in this, that you might find yourself being able to take advantage of a system integrator who is focused on your industry. Microsoft by far has creates the most opportunities for intellectual property from system integrators, where you have Microsoft Dynamics platforms that are then built in to fit different niche industries. There's steel making and metals accelerators for some system integrators. Others are more focused on advanced warehousing, and they have their own intellectual property in that. Still others more for things like textiles or for agriculture, or all kinds of different verticals that Microsoft licenses through system integrators called value-added resellers, who add their own flavor to the Microsoft platform. And Microsoft is a bit more open with allowing for that type of thing than other providers. So one of the things that you can do to get a leg up is see if you can find a system integrator. Food and beverage is another good example. Who specializes in your industry, so that at least from the very beginning, if they have intellectual property built around something that's unique to you, the likelihood that they understand your business and industry is greater.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like a really smart approach. So I'm curious if any business is kind of immune to these challenges. And I'm just thinking through like bigger multi-million-dollar software packages with the bigger system integrators, those types of things. Are those challenges felt by that size of a project and client as well?
Yeah, and I'm of the mind that those are actually more expensive problems and harder to detect. We'll say we'll take a hypothetical client with a hypothetical scenario, right? So let's say you're a $5 billion company implementing Microsoft Dynamics finance and operations, or finance and supply chain, whatever they call it today. And you have a multi-year implementation. You got a very, very large system integrator that's helping you through this. And generally, the biggest system integrators, when they encounter challenges, the first thing they do is add another body to it. And then the second thing they do is add another body to it. And you can guess what the third and fourth things are, right? So what ends up happening is you end up with this army that masks the problem, and increases the cost and drags out the timeline, because now we've got people that are onboarding that need to come up to speed, that need to have an impact, and whether or not they're even quality resources, you're throwing the problem at itself at that point, because you're just rolling the dice on it, and you end up in a spot where you have an army of people that are assigned to your project, and you don't have any idea which ones are quality and which ones aren't. So you end up masking the problem until all of a sudden you can't go live. And as a $5 billion company, you probably have been working on this for a couple of years, and all of a sudden you can't go live, and you're trying to figure out why. And why did it take us so long to learn this? And it's, well, because it's been masked. We've been trying to solve it by not taking the approach of understanding what the problem is in the first place, which is why I think an independent third party is an important piece of the program management of software selections, because that system integrator has no reason to tell you that, well, you know what, we got a bad resource here, so we're going to add another one to help that bad resource. They're not going to tell you that. They're just going to go and they're going to do it, and you're not going to know the reasoning behind it until you end up in a lawsuit, because you'll never know the difference. So those larger companies, I wouldn't say are immune to it. I would say that it takes longer to see it, and then they tend to have more resources available to throw at it when it does become more expensive, right? So if we end up blowing our budget by double, a $5 billion company is going to be able to handle that. Let's say it's a $2.5 million implementation, and now it's a $5 million implementation. A large company is going to be able to handle that a lot more effective than a smaller company that doesn't have the resources to spring another $2.5 million out of nowhere, because that's not a rounding error for them; it's material. So the problems can be bigger with the bigger organization and take longer to identify. There's also the benefit of resources that those larger firms have in being able to stomach that and get through it.
So can you, as Third Stage or as another independent third party, can you actually get that information from the system integrator to oversee the project, or is there just some read between the lines strategies that you just know out of experience?
You're never going to get the full story unless it goes to litigation, right? And even at that point, you still might not, because contrary to popular belief, when you go to litigation, it's not everything becomes available. It's more of we're going to search all of the documents for these keywords and see if and try to get 99% of the documents that are relevant, and then try to figure out how to sort through all of them. And again, when you're that large of an implementation, the details are more difficult to put into context, especially way after the fact. And then at the end of the day, those conversations on the system integrator side tend to be internal ones, unless you bring it up, right? So-and-so isn't performing well, and they literally asked me if we are a make-to-stock company today. It's what in the world are you talking about? So it's the obvious things that are easy to solve that get solved and are visible to the client, but the rest of that stuff is not stuff you'd ever even be privy to, the information that would lead you to even think that there might be a challenge. So having that independent third party who is able to say, that guy over there, he's not getting it, or that girl over there, she's not getting it. Let's see if she needs something to help through that. Like, I think that the part of the independent stance that we take isn't to say that person's a problem, get rid of them. It's we have a challenge, just solve it, right? So if we find that we're having challenges with resources, what we typically do is we find ways of giving them more support to see if we can't help them become more successful. Because there is an opportunity cost to the idea that you would change people midstream. You lose that value of the knowledge that they've already gained, and you got to plan around those types of things.
Yeah, and that's just basic change management, partner resolution. We never really go in, with guns ablazing, if you will, to try and change everything. Our position typically is the client advocate, but also in conjunction with the other partners that we work with to be able to solve for the maximum business value for our clients. So I think that's really important to understand, because a lot of times there's misperceptions around Third Stage that we are always going to do what's best for our client, but that doesn't mean that we don't work across the table with different SIs all the time and vendors.
Well, we're here to be a partner for all those involved, right? That's the general goal, at least from a Third Stage perspective, which is to say everybody here wants the same thing, which is to go live on time and on budget and do this effectively as a team. And that's the approach that we come at.
Absolutely. So I want to kind of ask you, I know you can't talk a ton about your expert witness work because it is extremely confidential, but can you just give us an overview, because you are an expert witness, Third Stage is an expert witness a lot of the time, for these soft failed implementations that do lead to some sort of lawsuit. So can you tell us kind of the role that you guys play in that?
Consultant and investigator, I think, is the easiest way of putting it. When we start to learn, when we get pulled into the expert witness stuff, our first job is to figure out what went wrong and why, right? So that's a big part of it, and then kind of consult on the case itself. So what did go wrong on both sides, right? So client says system integrator blew it. System integrator says, well, client also blew it. So who blew it? We all did at this point. But when it comes down to the litigation, it becomes a matter of what were the failure points that were the most impactful, and how does that look as it pertains to the success or failure of the implementation itself.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely something that leads to our independent status. Our non-biased status is a lot of expert witness work, because we don't have any relationships with SIs or vendors from a financial standpoint or a biasy standpoint. So I think that that's important to know too. I'm curious, we talked a little bit, getting back to D365, is there we talked about the industry size, the business size, right? Being immune to it. Is there any location or global impact for maybe multinational organizations or emerging market organizations to be aware of when it comes to implementing D365?
If you're thinking about it from a global level, I'm trying to think of the best way of framing it, because at the global level, the likelihood that you find one system integrator that's going to do it all across the world is generally lower than to have one for each area, or at least with interrelated folks. So I would say that on a global scale, if you're looking to implement, if you're looking to go big bang and do everybody all at the same time, you want to have one of those very large system integrators and somebody to keep an eye on them.
Yeah.
That can support each location individually as you're building this globally. If you're talking more of a phased rollout country by country, I like a more localized approach that says we're going to build it here, and then we're going to lift and shift it to somewhere else. And even at that, if you have one large team that was going phase to phase with one of those larger system integrators, what we see more often is that you still end up with different teams locally. So having somebody, you don't necessarily have to have the same system integrator site by site if you're doing that type of a rollout. And then since it's generally a different team when you get on the ground, even if it was the same integrator, you don't have the knowledge transfer benefits of using the same one as you would if you were doing a global big bang type of deployment. So.
And what about those mid-tier businesses that might be located in Africa or the Middle East, or areas that might not be a Microsoft hub? What are some considerations for that? We obviously know the challenge of connectivity, right, as a cloud-based software, but what are some other things to consider when considering D365?
So part of it's the two different software packages, right? You got finance and operations, and you got Business Central. F&O is the big tier one software. Business Central is more the tier two smaller software package. And that's the one that in most developing areas you find more common. The advice I would give those folks is saving $1 today could potentially cost you quite a lot more money later if you don't do things properly. So cutting a corner, getting the cheapest system integrator out there, doing it yourself, or things that I'd suggest that you take a real strong consideration of the risks that you create in those types of scenarios, and decide whether or not you're willing to accept those risks. Doing it yourself, you don't get a lot of support from anybody, and even project management, if you don't have that skill set in house, becomes a challenge. Hiring the cheapest system integrator out there, well, sometimes you get what you pay for. So do you have what it takes internally to give them the support that they need? Or in both of these scenarios, do you have an independent partner who can help you understand when things are going a little sideways? Because sometimes it's hard to see the forest for the trees when you're in the middle of things.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely good advice. And if you are a global organization or located in somewhere outside the U.S., just a reminder, we do have offices in Africa, APAC, in Australia. We have presence in Hong Kong, and then we also are located in Europe. We have a Europe office too. So if you do have questions and you're not in the greater United States or North America, we also have in-language presence for Latin America too. So lots of opportunities there. If you do have questions about your specific situation, feel free to reach out to us. But just to wrap up here, Adam, if you were to give one tip to a client that is considering D365, implementing it within their organization, what would that best practice be?
Well, I don't know if I like being pigeonholed to one tip, but what I will say is
no one ever listens to me when I say that, so feel free to give as many tips as you'd like to.
Well, so for starters, before I answer the question, I just want to say thank you to everybody that's joined us today. And for those of you from Norway, if I spoke to you this morning, hello again. Others, on the line here in the States and elsewhere, we really appreciate you guys joining us for this conversation. I think that Microsoft Dynamics is a real powerful platform, and it has a lot of benefits to it that the things that we talk about today shouldn't preclude you from buying that one in favor of a different one, if it is the right software package for you. So I guess then my tip for somebody that if I was to narrow it to one, would be that make sure that you get an extra set of eyes on things. The benefit of having somebody, even from a monitoring perspective, it may pay dividends way down the road. And that we at Third Stage, for example, we have a habit of being able to see things around the corner that our clients aren't knowledgeable enough in ERP implementations to see them, and that the system integrators, it's normal for them. So it's not around the corner. They already expect it. And since they already expect it, they're not really feeling like it's important to say a lot about it because it's normal for them. It's not normal for you because you guys don't implement software every day. So having somebody that can help identify those areas that are coming and what it is those are looking like so that you can know how it's supposed to look is really powerful. So that would be my suggestion, is intentionally having a set of eyes that is designed just for the sheer fact of making sure that the program is managed properly. And a lot of times the benefit of a third party doing that separates the fox from the hen house, if you will, and puts that level of visibility in a place where it can be more effectively managed.
Absolutely. Really well said. Just a reminder and some awareness tactics for you to be successful with this, very powerful software. So thank you so much, Adam, for joining us today and sharing your insight.
Okay. Thanks, Skylar and Adam. Thanks for being here. This is a great conversation. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll debrief and dive into a couple of the themes that we picked up on during that conversation. First, we'll take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 72. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler. And Kyler, we just had Adam Cheatham on the show talking about D365 implementations. What were some of your takeaways from that conversation, that interview you conducted with him?
Yeah, I guess in even being in the industry for a few years now, sometimes I don't realize, the things that seem like common sense and obvious in customer service to me. When we talk a lot of times about vendors, that isn't always the case when it comes to utilizing their software, buying their software, and thinking that relationship really is more customer service based. A lot of times it's not. And so I think that's the one thing that we really take away from this conversation. And Adam also did our sunsetting of Great Plains. So I said, are you sure you want to go down the Microsoft, route again? But I think his passion is really just exposing what pain points could potentially derail overall implementation, no matter the vendor,
Yeah.
So I think he just takes that independent and agnostic lens and looks at something a lot of times and says, we should talk about this to our audience community. And of course, I'm always up for a good podcast live stream. So him talking about that. But I think the thing that a lot of times even I was surprised at is when you have these implementation resourcing challenges. So say you're not able to find a system integrator, you're not able to find the actual resources that you need to go in to implement. Many times that can obviously derail your timeline and derail your budget. And I thought when you go in and purchase a system, you can implement it whenever you want. And that's actually not how that works at all. So that was a big learning for me, because as an organization, you would assume I bought the software, I bought the license, it's mine, I can implement it whenever I'm ready. And a lot of times that's not how that exactly works. So forward thinking that is just so important to your overall strategy, whether you're looking at any system, understanding the timeline and understanding the localized resources available for you to be able to go through that implementation successfully.
Yeah. And also, looking at ways you can build internal competencies to help minimize or at least reduce your dependency on those outside resources is another lesson from that whole thread too.
Absolutely. And that's very, very true. And just the overall transparency of what that team structure needs to look like and any gaps within it. And that's a lot of times what Adam talked about, he and team come in and do is say, okay, well, we might not be able to implement this today because the market's very saturated, the timeline is a little extended. But when you look at your overall core team, there's a lot we can do in that time to ensure that your implementation is successful, and understanding those workarounds. And the industry, as we know, is always so intertwined with different biases, with, different pain points to be able to go through implementation, that a lot of times having that experts, it's like, okay, I get it. I have the overall lens of that D365 right now is challenging to implement. And here's how I've done it with my other clients. I just feel like could be such an asset to having that and, a comfort level even to that project transformation team.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's just so many things you talked about in that interview that are just important reminders and understandings and things, pitfalls and things you've got to navigate is any implementation of any sort of technology.
Yeah, and I think the thing that surprised me is I assumed that like money talks a lot of times, the bigger organization you are, the bigger budget you have, then you kind of are immune to these pain points. And as he said, that's not the case. This is not something that any size business, any specific industry, those types of things are immune from. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Like, does small business, is that small to mid-sized business tier more effective than those multi-billion business tiers that are investing in D365? Because we know it is a huge scalable software. And he said, no, nobody is immune to resourcing challenges when it comes to the software community. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's another challenge with a lot of different deployments too, with that resource shortage. And it's not just the number or quantity of resources; it's also just the quality too, making sure you've got the right resources.
Yeah, and he talked about, in that conversation, if I was going through an implementation, I would rewind that conversation to write every tip down. He talked about how to make sure you are finding a quality SI, those types of things, what to ask them, what to, go through the interview process understanding. So that's going to be a huge asset to ensuring that, you're not having someone that's going to just, ghost you in the next week or so. So
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, that was a good conversation, and good to have him on the show again. And he's probably our most frequently returning guest on the show, just given his tenure at Third Stage, as well as his role and his seniority in the company. And he's a great guest to have. So appreciate you guys having that conversation and sharing it with us here today. So want to thank you again, Kyler, for another great episode. And thank you to the audience for listening in today, all your great feedback along the way. Be sure to subscribe to us wherever you listen to or watch podcasts, which could include YouTube, LinkedIn, or any of the audio podcast platforms. And if you could, just drop us a review too. We love to see what kind of reviews you have, and we're trying to escalate our reviews on all the podcast platforms, our 5-star rankings, if you will. So we'd love to hear whatever feedback you might have there. So thank you all for being here today. We will see you next week on Transformation Ground Control. Have a great week in the meantime. Take care.